Alright, so I'm going to show you how I made this procedural wood material. First of all, I have this set to cycles with the denoiser turned on in the viewport. Under the film tab, I have this set to transparent. And over here in the output, we got 1920 by 1920. And I have this HDRI from Polyhaven. I'm going to set it to 0.7 for the strength. I'm going to go Shift A and add an icosphere. And under this tab, I'm just going to set the subdivisions to 5. Right click and shade it smooth. And if we press N, we can go to the item and then go down here, click and drag down. And then I'm just going to change this to 1 for all of these. And then Control A and apply the scale. Press 0 to go to camera view. And if you press N and then go to the view, you can click camera to view and then adjust your camera so that way you're looking at your sphere. Just uncheck that box when you're done. I'm going to go over to the shading tab, click add new material. I'm going to Shift A and add a wave texture. Control T with the node wrangler enabled. I'm going to take the texture coordinate for object and plug it into the vector of the mapping node. Control Shift click on the wave texture to preview. You can see this is going in like a weird direction for our camera view. So I'm just going to click on it and then press R, then Z to rotate it on the Z axis and type in 45 to rotate it 45 degrees. That way our lines are facing us. And do not apply the scale because it will reset the lines to how it was before. I'm going to go Shift A and add a color ramp. I'm just going to leave these sliders, but you can change them to adjust the width of these bands. And over here on the wave texture, I'm just going to change the scale. I'm going to go 1.5. And for the distortion, you can see it's making these little waves. We need that for the wood grain. I'm going to go with 26.4, but you can do whatever you want. And for the detail, I'm going to change that to 15. And we need these to be more of like a wood grain. They're too far apart and not wavy enough. So we need to change the scale of one of these over here. So I'm just going to change the X value. The Y value looks kind of strange. So I'm just going to change the X value. I'm going to change it to 10. And then that'll make these waves a little bit more wood grain like. You can get a different width based off of how wide you want the wood grain to be. And you can adjust this depending on how you want your wood to look. And it's different than the wave texture scale. So just keep that in mind. And you can change the color ramp sliders to adjust how it fades off. I'm just going to leave it like it is for now. I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to drag these on over. I'm going to Shift A. We're going to add a mix color node and use this as the factor. And for this A color, I'm going to go with like a light gray brownish color. It's going to be hex value 8A, 8A, 85FF. If you want to use the exact color. And for the B color, I'm going to use 575350FF. And I have it up on the screen. Alright, so this is kind of like a washed out faded wood. But you can change these to whatever you want. And I'll show you a little bit of that later once we put our custom node group. But I'm going to come down here. We're going to add another layer of detail with a noise texture. Control T to add the coordinate and mapping nodes. And we're just going to hook up that object to the vector of the mapping node. And we're going to Control Shift click to preview that. We're going to add a color ramp. Plug that in between that. I'm going to come down here. We're going to change this. I'm going to change this scale to 30. going to change the detail to 15. I'm going to change this distortion to 3. So we get these little squiggly lines. I'm going to do the same thing as before, but first I'm going to change these sliders on the color amp so it's a little more contrasty. I'm just going to bring these in a little bit. Not all the way, just a little bit. And on this scale, since we scaled the other one on the X, we're going to scale this one on the X as well. And you can see it's bringing it closer together, giving it more of like a fine wood grain look. This is going to add just another layer of detail for it to be more realistic. You want to keep in mind that whatever direction you have your first mask, it's going to be the same direction for the second one. That way your wood grain goes in the same direction. Otherwise, it'll look weird and it'll be less realistic unless that's just something you're wanting to go for. But anyway, I'm going to Shift D to duplicate that mix color node. I'm just going to use the same colors for this second mask and plug that mask into the factor. And if we preview each of these, we can see the different wood grain effects we're getting, but we want to combine those. So I'm going to add another mix color node and plug the first mask into A and plug the second mask into B. And instead of mix, we're going to go with overlay. And I'm going to change that factor to 1. I'm going to zoom in so you can see the effects of it. We drag it to the left, we don't see that secondary color, but if we drag it all the way, it's blending both of these together. Alright, so now I'm just going to plug this into our BSDF. Control Shift click to preview, and you can see it's really shiny. We don't want that. And it's really smooth, so we're going to add some bump, and then we'll do the roughness. So I'm going to Shift A and add a bump node. I'm going to take the first color ramp output, and I'm going to plug that into the height of the bump node. And then plug the bump node into the normal of the BSDF. And this is way too strong, but you can see it's giving an effect now. I'm going to add another bump node. Just going to slide this over, connect the normal to the normal of the first bump node, and connect the second mask into the height of this bump node. We got these weird diamond shapes just because the strength's too high. I'm going to invert this and then set the strength down a bit so you can see a little bit better of the effect without it giving that weird pattern. Alright, so this first bump node, I'm going to do 0.25 on the strength. Now you can see it's looking a lot better. I'm going to change the strength of the second bump node as well to 0.25. It just gives it a subtle little elevated look. Makes it look a little bit more realistic of a wood grain than just having a purely smooth wood. I'm going to just drag these on over, and we're going to add another mix color node. This is going to be our roughness. So we can change this slider of our roughness on the BSDF, but I want to control these individual waves of the grain of wood. So I'm going to add a mix color node. I'm going to go ahead and just plug that into the roughness. And I'm going to take that first color ramp mask output and put that into the factor. And then we can change each of these by color A and color B on the mix color node. So that way, if you want the darker grain of wood to be more shiny, you can do that, or vice versa. Because sometimes in real life, even weathered wood has a little bit of a shine to it. So you can see that effect right there. Just a little bit of subtlety there. So I have the first color set to a little bit below pure white, and then the color B is going to be fully white, so that way it's fully rough. Alright, so now if we render that just in the viewport, here's what it looks like. Looks pretty decent. And now I'll show you how to make this into a node group. Alright, so I'm just going to box select everything except for the material output. Hit Control G. And we have this little group input over here. I'm just going to drag this over. And I want to change these colors later. So I'm just going to drag all those into the empty sockets and just go and rename these. The first two colors I'm going to change to grain color A and grain color B. And the second, I'm just going to call that fine grain A and fine grain B. We can change all those individually later to get some really cool effects. I'm just going to drag this back over. And I want to be able to change the mapping nodes, the scale, so that way we can get more of a spread out wood grain look if we want later. Just rename those if you want. I'm going to go ahead and plug our texture scales up and distortions up as well on both of them. And just give them a quick rename. I'm going to call these grain texture scales and then fine grain texture scales since we already have the grain scale and fine grain scale. I'm just going to drag this on over and we're going to plug in that bump nodes. I'm going to plug the first one that we did and then the second one below it. So we have the main grain on the top and then the fine grain on the bottom. And then I'm going to drag this on over and plug in the two colors of our roughness into that as well. So that way we can change these in our custom node. Drag this back over and hit tab. And then here we go. Here's what it looks like. Alright, so we can rename this if we want. I'm just going to call this Weathered Wood 1. And we can also go up here and change the material name. I'm just going to leave it like that. You can see if we change these colors, you can add some really cool effects depending on what kind of wood you're looking for. You can make a really subtle look or a really bold look with the main grain of the wood. You can really play around with it. And the grain scale, you can make it a little bit more spread out. And the same with the fine grain scale. And change the distortion if you want. The higher the distortion, it'll give you more of like rings for like knots and stuff. You can change the fine grain distortion as well. Change the bump strength of both of them. Then change the roughness if you want. Alrighty, so just a viewport render right here. Then I also have this plywood looking material, just with some different colors and various adjustments. And here's just the texture on some boards, so you kind of know what it would look like. That's about it. Thanks for watching.